Welcome, Szifra Birke.
Well, thank you, Robert Middleton. Good to be
So,
here.
so I know you've been on my list for years. I know I've seen you in my feed, whatever, and so I'm glad to finally meet you.
Thank you. We actually met very briefly when you were doing your short tour and you did Boston. So I
Ah,
met you one time during that
okay,
one time experience for you of doing the in-person stuff.
right, right. Yeah, that was my one on the road tour that I did. I did it once and I said, that's enough. It's not what I want to do. Anyway,
Right.
so tell us, Shifra, how are you an ordinary visionary?
So it's a really interesting question that I never would have thought about, honestly, had you not been a person doing these podcasts. And I don't know that I exactly would have thought of myself as a visionary, other than the fact that people have told me through my career. So I was thinking about the answer to this, and I'm going to start back, which if pull me off to the specific if you want to, but I had a father who was a visionary. My father was a Holocaust survivor who got out of Poland and escaped into Russia with my mother, whom he wasn't yet married to, and got himself to safety, relative safety, for the 5.5 years of the war, and then did a lot of things subsequent that were very visionary. So I grew up with
Wow.
someone who was very entrepreneurial and very willing to be out of the box in virtually everything. And when I was a little girl, my father, who was not religious by that time at all, pulled me out of school to go see the Prime Minister of Israel, who was coming to speak at a university. And I was, I don't know, 7 or 8.
Who was the
And
prime
the reason
minister at that time?
he was David Ben-Gurion.
Oh, okay. Wow.
And he looked really like Bozo the Clown, except with white hair. That just, if you Google a picture of him. And the reason I'm telling you this is I was in this auditorium. I was a little girl, the only kid there, I think, with a father who was religiously atheistic by that time. So this was very confusing to me. And my father said, he got us there early and situated me on the aisle and said, when he comes down, you're going to say hello. I said, fine. I didn't know what that meant. So now I see this guy who's surrounded by Secret Service and in this giant auditorium for a little girl. And there was no prayer I was going to say hello because there wasn't really the opportunity to say hello. And the next thing I know, I am tumbling into that aisle because my father had pushed me because I wasn't going to say hello. So I am now the spectacle at this university with this little guy, who's not much taller than I, with hair out to here, who basically catches me and asks me my name. And I really think
Wow.
that it is an example of of my whole experience, which is when I later asked my father, and my father said, first of all, why you not try when I ask you? Why don't you try? Which was really his mantra. And I think it is the theme of my visionary,
Why don't you
because
try
I
when
asked
I
myself,
ask you?
yeah, why you not
Try for
try?
God's sakes.
Exactly. And then he tells me, and I don't know that swearing is allowed on this, but I'm a little girl, and he tells me, do people swear on this podcast, or should I keep it
You can
clean?
say anything you want.
All right. Well, he said to me, I'm this little girl, and he says, he shits the same way you do. What are you thinking? Just because he has a big name and he's a big title. So in that context, growing up in that context, given my personality, I think it was a really good fit for me to do things that other people weren't doing at the time. So that's the context in which I
So your
became.
father sort of thrust you into get out there, You're just like everybody else. No one's better than you, kind of thing, right? Yeah,
Exactly. And
yeah,
you're just like everyone else. And even more importantly, the second part of what you said, no one else is more important than you are. And so what
yeah.
is there to be afraid of? So I
That's a
think
great belief to be instilled at a young age, isn't it?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know. The answer is yes. I mean, it would have been nice had there been a gentler entree into that, I think, because there were many variations of this theme, not as grand as being, thrown at David Ben-Gurion, but I think so. If I bump through answers to your real question about visionary and think about my career, and then maybe even think about now, basically, I'm in your spot post career. I do a tiny bit still of paid work, but most of my work is not for money. Um, I would say that I started as a psychotherapist. And as a psychotherapist, I began work with people who did not have a group yet. But I began to wonder about people who had a family member, a parent, who had an alcohol issue. And so I remember doing these groups. I have the folder that says grown children of alcoholics. And then not long out, I started doing groups, which was unheard of because it was such a private kind of experience. People were ashamed. And so I began doing these groups. And you're old enough to remember, probably, as many people on this call are, the late 70s, early 80s, mid 80s, were this boom of the adult children of alcoholics movement.
Right,
And
right.
so I ended up with a book published. I worked with Claudia Black, who was one of the definite pioneers. She said, Szifra, you were a pioneer too. And so that was a visionary kind of thing. Then in my next actual career, I shifted out of psychotherapy and I was potentially one of the earliest shrink types in the financial planners' offices. So I was on retainer at a boutique wealth management firm doing all the people stuff I had learned during my life and in my first career.
So what do you
Carrying
mean
that
people stuff in that context?
in that context. So you're sitting with a financial planner and they're very data oriented and they are giving you all the data, all the facts. And if it's not your area of expertise, you're glazing over and they're not noticing.
Yeah, really.
Right? So I'm in the room. Both two things. One is training them to learn what the cues are, to take breaks, to ask questions.
So you'd be
And
in there with the partner and the client, and you were kind of facilitating the communication in a way.
so the answer is yes. And so there were many times I was in the room with, in, the conference room, and I'd facilitate. I was called a communication something because at the time they were really nervous about figuring out some psych type name. We ended up coming up with a name actually, which was financial behavior therapist. There are now 3 in the country. I was the first, and now actually there will be a lot because they're starting to license that title.
Huh.
A big organization is starting to license that title. But the other thing I did, Robert, was I just did a lot of training with financial professionals so that they could get better on their own of watching someone, pull back, get glazed over, get quiet, not know what questions to ask. And so they learned the cues and they learned to slow themselves down and pause and ask some questions. They would sometimes go into the meeting with a bulleted list of questions. And the agreement was they would have to come to the end of their questions, which were check-in questions. So that was very different. I ended up on Business Week TV because of that, and in Business Week. And, it was just, again, a thing that wasn't happening yet. It's pretty common now, relatively speaking. Nobody's shocked by it anymore. That was, that was around 2001. That happened. I mean, I remember a specific, that's why I just, went into the file cabinets for a second. I remember specifically a wealth management firm asking what to do around 9/11, because of course things on the economic front just started tanking. And most planners were afraid to call people because people wanted to pull all their money out. And so, planners were nervous, and, wealth professionals. And, we came up with a very different kind of strategy that ended up being remarkably successful. So
that's an interesting transition from psychotherapy to working in a financial institution, doing that. How did that transition take place, and why did it take place?
So I made a decision. I wanted to take on my own money stuff, and so I started to study the psychology of money and people's relationships with money. I know you just had someone on who that's his career, and I watched that and was fascinated actually by the 3-chair technique and some of the work he was doing.
Right.
So recommend that one to your podcast viewers. So I happened to be investing money in, with a wealth management firm, and the kinds of questions I would ask or the conversations I had with the people who were advising me surprised them. And they were like, you ask questions and make comments differently from most of our clients. Why is that? And so we began to talk about the work that I'd been doing on my own I don't know what to call it, to understand my relationship with money in a more clear and specific. I wanted to understand the specifics of why I functioned the way I did, and which things about my relationship with money I wanted to keep, which ones I wanted to modify, which ones I wanted to chuck. And so it's a lot of work, actually. Money is pretty fraught.
Well, yeah,
So
money is one of the most emotional things in our life. I mean, we want more money. We're afraid we'll lose our money. We think of money in terms of status, obviously. I'm better than you because I have more. I'm less than you because I have less. I'm more okay with more money. I mean,
right.
As a
It's many
self-employed
things.
person all my life, I can appreciate that.
Yeah, same. I worked for someone for 5.5 years and then worked for myself. So I'm with you on that. And you're right. It's, people like money can be security or insecurity. It can, there are just a lot of ways we have a connection with money. And you're right also that it lights up the limbic system, the emotional part of the brain, more than most anything else. It's a real threat to that system. And so, and taboo, we haven't gotten desensitized talking about it in our culture. So some cultures talk about it, but we don't. So, we don't have the neurons that are linked together comfortably. It's, so when the kinds of questions I asked them and the kinds of comments I made, they ended up saying, we've been wondering about having someone come in and do some training or help us with this. So I became that person.
So how long did you do that work?
I'm still doing that work, not in that way, but private consulting. So I still do that money work. Now I would say, I'm an executive leadership coach or an executive coach with a couple of different paths. And one of them is money conversations. And that could be a conversation with a wealth management professional, but it also could be an office of dentists and their whole team, which I've done many of, because when they tell you you need a crown or an implant and it's very expensive, and the person telling you that might make 30 or 35,000 a year now in 2024, but your procedure, just one implant might, be $6,000. And if they see the way, they're making judgments based on superficialities. If they see me come in, this is already looking good for me. I'm usually even more casual. So they're making assumptions that I might not have the money to pay for that procedure. And the whole way they approach me might send cues to me that they're nervous but I don't know that they're nervous about talking about money. So I'm thinking, are they really capable at this office of doing this work? So there are a lot of places that might benefit from having someone, a whole team of theirs, be comfortable talking about fees.
So my guess is you've really done a deep dive into some of the psychology around money, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Let's get into some of that stuff because it's we're sort of talking about your situation. But tell me, let's talk about some of these things that really sidetrack us. I mean, the one with that's an interesting example. I'm a dental person. I make $35,000. $6,000 is a lot of money to them, especially. And so it gets confusing, and somehow mixed messages are communicated, right? And I've
Yeah,
had
it's
that
like,
experience. And, I just have to mention this one because it's an interesting one. I wanted to have my gutters fixed, and I saw an ad online, and I said, okay, I'll check it out. And so I got an appointment. And they really had the sales process worked out. They thought this through in great depth, let me tell you. So it was very kind of low key. And then they gave me the price, and I gulped because it was a lot of money. It was a lot of money. But ultimately, I went with it. It has a lifetime guarantee. It has a lifetime guarantee past my ownership of the house. So it adds to the value of my house and, all these things. And I thought, well, it really is too much money, but I had to admire them, how brilliantly they communicated it and set it up, and it was a quality product, but oh my God, it was a lot of money. So
so I'm fascinated. What you're doing right now is what we do. Like, right, you have said it's a lot of money 2 or 3 times, and maybe reluctant to say what that number is
yeah,
because, right, for whatever that reason is about, we
I'm
don't want
almost
to say.
embarrassed saying it. It's like well, I'll tell you what it was. It was $7,000.
Okay, so
And
I,
the material was probably $1,000, and the labor was maybe 500. So it was a pretty damn big markup for
you
what it
know,
was.
so good for you, first off, for saying the number. But you see, like, I'm always captivated at how private we are. When you kept saying it's so much, it's so much. Now, granted, we all have different amounts of money and we've earned different amounts. And so what's a lot to one person is not to another. But I was expecting it to be more, Robert, just by the way you were saying, I can't believe I paid this much, like parenthetically, what was wrong with
Well,
me that I paid
I
so much?
had the sense they were going to send 20 people to, and this one guy came for half a day. And I went, yeah, they're making a good profit on this. They advertise widely on the internet, and it's interesting thing. Their headline is, "What does it cost to replace your gutters?" But they never tell you until you've met with them and you've talked to them. They never will tell you ahead of time. They've made it so that, well, we have to look at your house and blah blah blah. And I also got the sense afterwards, if I'd held out a bit, I could have gotten a lower price, I'm sure. Because they
Well,
even gave me a higher price, but if I decide today, then it's a lower price, almost a couple thousand less. So, anyway, this
so
whole,
they have a lot of strategies that we know work, right? It's like the coupons that expire, that urgency we have, the pressure of do it now, or you're going to lose because I think you maybe know this, that loss is twice as powerful to the brain as gain. Like this guy, Hahnemann won the Nobel Prize for just understanding that notion. So if we fear losing something, our brain gets really anxious. And when you have the opportunity to gain something equal, it doesn't have the same kind of punch as the fear of loss. So it's marketers, definitely take advantage of that. When you wanted to talk about being sidetracked, but I just thought of something that I have, I don't know, come to in the years of working with money on my own. I mean, about myself. And that is that you can value the money as, the numeric amount. You also can optimize or maximize for something other than those numbers. So for you, it might have been worth a lot of money to be done. Just to have the decision made about who was doing the gutters and just have that item checked off your list with people that you had a sense that you trusted. And so a simple example is I have family in Florida. One of my sons and daughter-in-law and grandchildren are there. And historically, I looked for the best ticket price because it seemed, in the daughter of Holocaust survivors who, why would you pay retail shift? Why would you pay
You
retail?
play
Right?
retail.
Yeah. So, I didn't want to pay retail for anything. I didn't want to be what my father would call a monkey. Anybody who paid retail was a monkey to him.
Oh,
So,
really?
yeah, if you didn't get a deal, you were a monkey. So he would have called you a monkey if you didn't navigate that 7,000. I'm
Yeah.
saying something very different here, though. And it's taken me a whole lifetime to get my own values around money and not just my parents. And so now I ask myself very different questions. I ask, what would it be worth for you to get there peacefully with a good flight at a time that worked well for you and that was easy to get from the airport to their house? Like, what's that worth to you? And I literally could be, is that worth $100? Well, it's certainly worth $100 for me to arrive peaceful for my son, daughter-in-law, and grandchildren rather than tired, stressed. Is it worth $150? Maybe. So the questions I ask myself enabled me to make very different financial decisions because I'm optimizing for something very different. So there are times that if I were looking at that gutter experience, I might wonder, were these people who own the company or who work for the company deserving in a different kind of way of extra money because they had to start their career later? Maybe they were immigrants from another country who got sidetracked because of the time it took to get work permits to get to the US, and I want to support them. So for me to pay some extra money so they get to send their kids to college if that's what they want to do, or they get to live in a house or rent a reasonable apartment. So I have very different questions that come through my brain that make me more peaceful.
Oh, that's interesting. But one of the things about money is what's valuable to me is not necessarily valuable to you for whatever reason. And we had to go to I won't get into the big details, but we had to go to Carmel, which is close by, Carmel by the sea. But there was a special event happening that day, and we rented a little hotel room that was $400 a night. And I think that's quite a lot for how simple a room it was. It was clean, it was nice, it was okay, but $400 a night. So there are a lot of things like that, and I'm often amazed because I was in the consulting coaching field for 25 years. And it took me a long time to get a grip on what I could charge and what things were worth. And interestingly, one of my most successful programs was one of my most expensive. And when I charged that amount and demanded a lot of my participants, it was a 1-year program. They really stepped up and took action because they were investing in that program, so over a period of a year.
Right.
But the total cost was only, a little more than double what my gutters were that took an hour and a half or 5 hours to install, and I put in a lot of hours. So it's interesting. So, maybe it should have been twice as much. I'm not sure the market would have borne that, but always this fear of charging too much. And the thought is, and I worked with a lot of clients on this, well, if I charge too much, no one will buy the service.
Yeah.
And so you're really trying to see, well, it's looking for, as you said, value. What does it mean to me? One of the sort of formulas I used, maybe you can give me some insight into this, was, well, this client would paid, it was $13,000 for a year of coaching. So about $1,000 a month. And that included a live 3-day workshop as well. But everything else was done virtually by phone at that time. And, but you think, well, $13,000 is, some people would say that's nothing. Some people would say, oh my God, that's a lot. But if that client just got 1 or 2 new clients over a year, it would more than pay for itself. So you have to look at it proportionately, or.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think when I was doing this work, the consulting work and making decisions about what to charge, one of the things I would do is help the person look at what is the return on investment for you, and exactly what you're talking about, Robert. So whatever my fee was, and I'm glad to say what it was when I, stopped, and it was different, corporate versus nonprofit versus, I had the flexibility to customize to the person. I had a rate, but I could customize to the person if I thought they were working really hard. And again, maybe new to the country, or, circumstances were tough right then, whatever. But I would show them just exactly what you are saying right now. I would say, okay, so if this year you are able to learn this skill and you are going to be able then to connect better and add one more person, let's look at what that person would bring to your practice or your business or your whatever. And remember that we've got that number, and you will have that skill for the whole rest of your life. And
Exactly.
Multiply that out. And so very often just helping them look at, what they would gain made a big difference for most people. But it's also it took me a long time, like it did for you, to get comfortable talking about fees. The reason I took this money thing on ultimately was I was toward the end of my psychotherapy career. And one of my clients, who was not the most secure fellow in the world, looked at me when I was charging for a second or third no-show, and said, wow, Szifra, you really have trouble talking about money. And I thought, oh man, this is not good. And I've been thinking about it for a very long time. And that was, that straw was like, okay, I am taking this on. Yeah. So I struggled for a long time, and I didn't charge enough, and I worked nights, and I carried a pager, and I was too available, and just all the things that.
Yeah. So, somewhere, somehow, I can't remember when it happened. But I think it might have been when I started to sell my manual. I hadn't sold anything online. I had an email list for a year or two, and then I wrote the manual, and I said, well, let's see if I can sell it online. And I sold a lot of them and made a lot of money at it. And, but it was a small item. It was, I can't remember even what I charged for it, but, somewhere it was like, yeah, people really want this stuff. People are really looking for ways to attract clients, and people are not good at it. And this is of real value to people. Now, a lot more people do it these days. I was one of the first people to do it for self-employed people. So then not long after that, I started to offer courses. And, I don't know why I decided on a 1-year course, but that was a good marketing move. And I did that for 4 years. And then it was almost too much, working with people for a whole year. And then I kind of stepped back and, some people would have said, Robert, you got to double the price and step up. Offer half as much for twice the money. Some of these things start to feel very manipulative after a while. And finding that thing of what's real value versus some kind of sort of artificial value. You see these programs. Oh, I'm doing this program, and it's only $5,000 a month. And I went, holy shit, you're in a different mindset than I am about this stuff. But maybe for someone, a $5,000 program, depending on what they're offering, could really make sense to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. And I think your work, honestly, I don't know that you think of it this way, Robert, but because I've been around other marketers who do charge a whole lot more than you do, I have really felt like through the 20 years or so that I've been following you, that you have done noble, fair, unusually solid work for people, and given from a value system that not everybody has. And, it makes me think of the kinds of things that I'm hyper focused on now. Like you do all the political, your post-retirement work is equally from those values of wanting to make a difference.
Yeah.
That's what and I would say that's true for me too. And, so whether it's, some of the political things that I do, some of the mentoring that I do for no cost now that would be, it would be hard for somebody to get that kind of mentoring at no cost easily. And I want to be able to do that. Or, even my husband and I talked with another time you and I connected was I did a consult with you when Jay wrote the book, Simple Steps to Change. I think you and I had a consult about marketing that book, and you had some ideas. So he and I had each written a how-to book. Mine was an adult children of alcoholics book many, decades ago. It was called Together We Heal. Jay wrote Simple Steps to Change. And then we started riding a tandem bike. I'm wearing this tandem necklace to partly remind me and partly because do you see it?
Yes, great.
Tandem bike necklace. So we wrote a book. I had this idea that we should write a book because I realized, first of all, my favorite way to work is in tandem with people. I'm guessing that isn't necessarily your best way to work. Is that right? Yeah.
It's always been one-on-one with my client.
Yes. And I tend to start with a team and then work with the behind the scenes work. I do best tandem. And it's one-on-one for me also. But I mean, it doesn't matter. So Jay and I decided to write this book, which ended up being a very different kind of book because it's kind of a tell-all. It's like talking about money. Was I willing as a former psychotherapist to talk about how many marriages I was in, or the way my late husband died, or my relationship with Jay and what that is? And so, there's a way in which it's not visionary exactly, but it has this path of va try and see how you feel, because we didn't have to release the book, right, if it felt too personal. But my closest friends who I share, I think, pretty much everything with, because I'm one of those people who doesn't have secrets. I'm not telling everybody, but the people closest to me know my inner world, have said, I can't believe you and Jay shared so much about yourselves. This is really private. And it's kind of like money. I feel like if I hadn't taken on the money stuff and been willing to talk about that, I wouldn't have been able to release this book, because it would have felt similarly private. So I don't know if that's visionary exactly, but it's wanting to know your own values and wanting to keep growing and changing and thriving and staying robust, no matter what age we are. And maybe that's a little bit visionary in a different kind of
Yeah.
way.
Well, I take visionary in a sort of a simple kind of way. You have an idea, you go, and that's a vision. We have little visions every day. I'll do this, I'll go here, I'll a past client, I get his newsletter, and I'd never really responded to it in a long time. And something about the newsletter was really touching to me. He does a newsletter just about what's happening in his personal life, although he's a financial planner. And so it's like I'm seeing his kids grow up through his newsletter. Anyway, so I said, we should talk. We haven't talked for a long time, so we're going to be talking soon.
That is cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's just an example of, I see a possibility for connection. So if we think that, visionariness, if that's a word, is built into all of us all the time.
Yeah.
And that's why I say we're just ordinary people that have visions. But the twist is we have a vision to make a difference. We want to make a contribution. We want to help people in some way. It's not just for ourselves.
Right.
So the people that I'm talking to are pretty much fit in that category. It's like, how can I help? How can I, given my background, experience, understanding, insights, what can I offer? And then how can I offer it? And some people offer it in really creative ways.
Yeah. And sometimes it's a little scary to think about offering it. So an example that fits what you're describing that pushed me hard was there's an immigration institute in Lowell, Mass, where I live. It's Lowell, Boston, Manchester, New Hampshire. That it's the International Institute of New England. And when the first Trump election or presidency, the funding for immigration, as you can imagine, just plummeted. And so there were all these people organizations who didn't have funding to help the people who they needed to help. So one of the people who worked at the organization had been a storyteller and made the decision that storytelling might be a way to raise funds and do a very different kind of fundraiser. So because my parents were well known I'm back in Lowell, ironically. I didn't live here forever, and then I'm back. But because my parents had a clothing store, and that's a whole separate story, there's a documentary done on them that's pretty funny called Browsing Through Burke's, because you couldn't browse. My dad didn't let people browse, which is yet another story, in a clothing store. There was literally a big no browsing.
You came here to buy.
Exactly. That's exactly right. He was, as my friend said, he wasn't the soup Nazi. He was the suit Nazi, like Seinfeld. So anyway, because he was well known and there was a documentary done on him, I was asked to tell a story. And the story was done in that, do you know The Moth on NPR? It's the Moth Radio Hour. It's a particular way. Yeah. So the story is timed and you have no notes and you have to just present it this certain way. And you can see I'm not shy and I'm not afraid to tell a story, but I don't like to have to be in this little carefully delineated box. There's a word I can't find.
Yeah.
So I said, no, thanks. I'll help you find someone. They kept bugging me. And, finally I decided, I go around getting coats and boots and all kinds of stuff for people who are coming into the country. if I could help raise money, why don't I just suck it up and get over my fear or my reservations and try to tell this story? So I did. And if your viewers or anybody else Googles my name and story, probably they're going to get a YouTube story of me telling this, because it ended up on, I ended up telling it on WGBH TV, and it became like this, like, I don't know, hot story. And when public TV has a 23-minute segment and they need it to be 30, or 22 minutes, they put in some of these stories, and mine
Right.
ends up coming up all the time. And I only
Ah.
know that because friends call me and say, "Oh, Szifra, I just saw you on GBH." And I'm like, seriously? So anyway, the reason that that's relevant, besides raising money, is that it opened doors I would never have expected. It opened doors for me to do training with other people around telling your story, even though you're uncomfortable, telling your name story, and names being, in particular, very relevant for people coming into this country who take simple kinds of names because they don't want us to have to work so hard. They don't want to
Sure.
be discriminated against. But sometimes they really don't want the names that they end up with. So I remember the time at WGBH where I told my story. There were other storytellers, and I met this young man who'd been in the country for 3 months, and I invited him to our house for Thanksgiving. And at that thing, he was introduced to me as Alex by the person who was coordinating it and by himself. And so at Thanksgiving, I asked him, so is Alex a name you want, or is it a name you chose? He said, well, my name is Alexis Cubana. And I said, what did people call you back home? He said, oh, nobody would call you Alex. They would call you Cubana. And I said, well, why are you not Cubana here then? And so we had this long conversation. And the reason it was relevant is he said in this quiet voice, he said, Szifra, I don't know why this is going to make me cry. When people say Alex, I don't know who Alex is. It's amazing. This is years and years ago. But when people say Cubana, Cubana has roots and my history and my whole family. And I know who Cubana is. And from that moment, I thought, I am so grateful that I told this story, and I'm so grateful to have this window in that changes every interaction I may have with somebody about their name, and being able to ask them, so what name do you really want to be called? And many people, after watching my story, have told me, shot me an email or told me when I, tell it somewhere, I'm going back to using the name I know. So, sometimes you have to be brave and push and have resilience, like on the bike when you're climbing a hard hill on the tandem. You just have to pedal stroke after pedal stroke to get up to that top of the hill. And so anyway.
Yeah, very interesting. My wife is from Nepal. And she has an interesting first name that no one, when you see it, you don't know how to pronounce it, which is always an issue. It's sometimes slightly hard to pronounce. It's Saroj, Saroj, Saroj.
Oh, I totally know that name.
Yeah, it's a great name. But all her relatives call her Dolly. And, going back to Nepal. And so everybody calls her Dolly, but I call her Saroj. And so she's known as Saroj amongst her non-familiar familial friends,
Isn't that funny, that flip?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so funny. Do you know how Dolly came to be?
I'm not. I probably knew at one point. I just can't remember off the top of my head how it is. But
yeah, that's so funny. Usually when I have my name on a screen like this, I put SHIFRA in parentheses,
Yes.
so that
Right.
people aren't struggling with it. But I cannot tell you how many people I have given cues to for how they might be able to introduce their name. Like, I don't know, Saroj, like, what do we have that's a je? We don't have a je sound, do we? So we have nothing, like we could say Sarah with je, Saroj. But
Right.
it's interesting to wonder. But it doesn't take much for us to slow down and do a little work. They have to do work. Robert's not a name that people have heard before, and they're like having to memorize this brand new word, one more word to memorize.
Right. Right.
Certainly Shifra. So,
Yeah, I think there's some advantages of having a different name because you have to work hard to remember it, but then you never forget it. And
if you get
I've
it.
never met anyone else in the world named Shifra, so that sticks in your mind. But Susan, Robert, Wendy, Mary, these are all the names of my sisters. Anyway, we just
Yeah.
got basic Anglo-American names. So anyway, so tell me, I want to go back to your history a little bit. So you worked with this accounting firm and you've done coaching with people. Tell me some of a story or two, interesting stories of working with clients around some of the issues we've been talking about. I'm especially interested in this whole thing of value. It goes from, we're talking about gutters. What are gutters worth, or what's a high-end consulting program worth and all of that. So it's such an interesting dynamic. What is something worth? What is the value of something?
So, yeah. I mean, this doesn't come into what you're saying, but I had that when we were pricing our book. Can I hold up my book? Because I just
Yeah,
think
yeah,
it's fun. I
sure.
I
I
do
can give
have,
you a link to it too.
yeah.
In
So it's kind
tandem.
of fun,
It's
right? This
great.
is Jay and me right in our neighborhood, actually.
Yeah,
So,
great.
so that's kind of fun. So when we were pricing the book, I had that question. Like, what is the value? And we no longer need to make money from the book, but it needs to be seen as valued. And so we were advised not to do like $9.95 because that makes it look not like a professional book. And, so there's that kind of question. Because if you were a lawyer or a consultant who charged $25 an hour, it would look pretty weird. So
Yeah.
there's that. Then there's value, like most money managers charge approximately 1%, somewhere in that to
1% of the
manage your,
net assets under management, right?
exactly, to
Right.
manage your portfolio. And the question is, what are you getting for that 1%? With some people, you're getting a consultation whenever you need it. So that you can sleep at night. And what's it worth to sleep at night? I mean, so there's huge value for that. Are you getting consultation around other aspects of money? Advice around whether to keep your mortgage or pay it off, advice around when to gift. Should you use part of your money now while you're alive? Can you have those conversations? Because you've got a will, maybe even a trust, and people are going to inherit your money. But what part of that would you like to do now because you could afford to? And would it make a difference either in terms of someone else's life, like a niece's life who's building a business or trying to buy a home or educating a kid, or just because it would feel good with a family member that doesn't really have that much, to augment their retirement maybe, and to do it while you're alive, because who knows what's going to happen, right? So
Yeah.
are you having those conversations? Or is it simply the person is managing your money? Because if it's the latter, you could do that for a whole lot less than 1%. Because the person isn't giving you that other value.
Right.
So am I answering your question about value?
Yeah. I mean, it's a multi-dimensional conversation. Sometimes it's your own self-worth. It's just that. And see, I don't have any initials at the end of my name, so I didn't get a college education. So I had to go through. Well, I'm still valuable because I know certain things and I can help people in certain ways. But no one ever asked me if I had a college education or a degree in marketing either. So there's so many interesting dynamics there about what you're worth. And then sometimes it feels kind of false. It's sort of like, well, I get emails every day practically from someone that says, I've been looking at your website and I know ways that I can help you. And I know they just bought a list and this is being sent out to tens of thousands of people and they didn't look at my website probably. And so I get that there's not really any value there anyway. So perception and value are sort of dance around each other.
Yes, huge, right? Other perception of you. And what you just alluded to is our perception of ourselves and how long it takes to get comfortable with, I have something of value to offer, if we do. And then looking at the marketplace. So I don't know that anybody is worth some of the money that people are charging. So let's say an attorney is charging $900 an hour, some Boston or New York City attorney. Is somebody worth $900 an hour? It's questionable, right?
Well, if he's working with a multi-billion-dollar firm, maybe he is, because if he has certain information that would help you do God knows what, it could be worth a lot of money. And $900 in that case could be cheap.
It's
right?
pennies. That's pennies. The question would be, is that $900 or $1,500 or $2,000 an hour person or $5,000 an hour person? Are there other people around doing the same or as valuable work for much less money? It's like when Consumer Reports does their, here's our pick, but here's the better price. And sometimes the better priced one is actually their first choice. And I forget, they have a name for that when in the magazine. And so, yeah, I think it's tricky. Valuing ourselves, I think, is challenging, especially when we're first in a career and we haven't gotten much. The feedback loops we're getting aren't clear to us yet. I remember when I raised my fee, I can't even remember now the exact numbers, but I remember being really nervous when I raised my fee as a psychotherapist. I stopped taking insurance and I raised my fees, and I would answer the phone, and I had a deal with myself that I would say my fee and then I would count. Because my first impulse, as soon as somebody paused, was to jump in to say, well, if you can't afford that, then, I can navigate with you, because that was what I had done for my whole career. And I would just count, and they would say either, oh, that's all. And then I would almost drop the phone, or they, because
that's like, all? Darn it, I should have charged more.
Or they would say, oh, there's no way I can afford that. And then we could engage in a conversation. But enough of the, oh, that's all, or that's okay, or yes, I can manage that, told me, like with your program, yeah, okay, I guess this is a fee that's reasonable enough, even if it's uncomfortable for me still. And then at some point that becomes normative for you. And then rates go up and you go through it again, the transition again. And
right.
Yeah.
No, I always had a closing line after talking to people and finding out what they needed and seeing if I could help them. And so I always left the price to the very end, which is the best thing to do. But I said, my fee is X dollars for this program. Does this work for your budget right now? And so it's back on them thinking, oh, can I afford this or not?
Yeah.
And almost always people would say, oh, yeah, that's no problem. And then we knew, okay, so we've handled that kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
um,
It's a very nice way to ask the question. It's respectful and it's honest,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And peaceful for you, maybe.
yeah. And it's more comfortable. I mean, and it's kind of awkward if I say, well, my fee is $5,000, and then pregnant pause. And so a good close is always a question. Here it is. Does that work for your budget?
Yeah. Yeah.
And essentially, we've established that they need the service, they want the service. So the only question is, does it fit their budget or not? So
Hmm.
it's thinking through the dynamic of that and saying it in such a way that people can respond. And some people would say, "Oh my God, that doesn't fit my budget. I could never afford that ever." And sometimes we can work it out, and sometimes we can't. What can I say?
Yeah.
Some people have expectations that it will be 10% of what I charge or whatever it happens.
Yeah.
It's interesting now in a life where I'm living off savings and Social Security and investments, and I don't have to chase money anymore. So I'm in a different world of not having to worry about getting money for and not wanting to really do that anymore. So it's interesting.
That is interesting. Speaking of that, this is kind of flipping the table, so tell me if you don't want to talk about it, but I was captivated by a conversation you had with one of the, I think it was during an Ordinary Visionary interview, I can't remember which one, and you were talking about the person who's unhomed that you help, and you hire him, and you've tried to get him to she was a coach, and you tried to get him to have this other outlook around money and um, responsibility and consistency. And he's like, yeah, no, that's not what I want to do. And I thought, wow, that's a big challenge. It's like a parent with a child gone astray, like
Yeah,
trying
yeah,
to create a path that he doesn't seem to care enough about.
yeah. This individual who still he does our jobs for us, and I've helped him out, and I encourage him, and I've done a little bit of coaching for him. But it's been a valuable thing for me to realize that even when someone needs so much, they're just not motivated. It's hard to get him to work more than 2 hours. He'll work for 2 hours pretty intensely, and then he's got to get out of here. And so I've just gotten to the point of just accepting where he is and helping him how I can.
Yeah,
And
good for you.
but that's really true for any client. Often I saw a potential for a client that they couldn't see. My vision for them was this, their vision was for this. So you can't push people into that vision. And how do I know that's the right vision for them? That's just something that popped up in my head, so it's
Right,
a possibility in some dimension, but not necessarily for them.
right.
But digging into what do you really want? What's really important to you? Why is that important to you anyway? Because there's so many dimensions of being self-employed and working for yourself and working with clients and exercising your creativity. And some people you could say, I'm going to help this person, and they're going to go way beyond what I could even help them with. They're just going to, you can tell it's in them already. And some people, you could give them 10 and they give you back 1. And some people, you give them 1 and they give you back 10. Just the way it is. So you never
Right.
know how it's going to go, but you try to meet them in the present moment with, well, what's next?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
same for Chris, just what's next for him. And maybe someday he'll wake up and go, I don't want to be sleeping in my car for the rest of my life. I don't know, but maybe he will. He's been on the street for half his life, 20 years. So it's hard to understand that reality, but everyone has their own background and experiences and issues. And
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned addiction, which complicates everything.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that may
And
be the
he
primary
kind of hides his
driver.
addiction. I know he smokes marijuana, which isn't too bad unless you completely overdo it. But I think he also does other drugs. So, but he
Yeah.
really hides that.
Yeah. Would he tell you if you asked, or would you rather not know?
Oh, the thing is, I'm not a drug addiction counselor. You know, it's something I'm not really equipped to help him with. So,
Yeah. So you might be better just to keep
yeah.
helping him the way you're helping him now. Yeah.
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 And encouraging him and supporting him. And, you know, sometimes he shows up clear-headed and ready to work, and sometimes he's really manic. He works really hard, but man, he's doing things too fast, you know, and it's interesting.
Yeah. 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 Well, it is lovely that you have this relationship for him and maybe for you, to just broaden horizons and do something that makes a difference, even if it makes a difference for him today, because you don't know, transition and change are funny, it's kind of slow, 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 and then you might hit a tipping point and the change happens, the transition happens, and you are, you know, planting seeds, one of which might germinate at the right time for him. And just the fact that he has you available, Robert, is so huge. Because if he makes a change, he may not have very many people outside the unhomed community who he can consult with and say, I've decided to clean my act up. Can you help me figure out some steps here? It's huge.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, I helped another guy who was living in his van, and I helped him get a RV. And just in the last 2 weeks, he moved into government subsidized housing. So he's an older guy, and he just, there's a lot of people in the world that just didn't save enough money and didn't manage their finances that well and made some mistakes. And if we realized how many people like that there are in the U.S., we would be shocked. There's a lot of people that are really right on the edge. And, it's just how they ended up. But we got him into a little house. It's a little 2-room house, standalone house. And just saw him yesterday, and he's really, really happy. And
that is, yeah.
And it's a situation where the government is helping him a little bit. He has a little bit of Social Security and a little bit of this, and he manages his money really well and really closely and knows what he's doing and everything. But the last years of his life don't have to be living in a little cramped RV, Anyway.
It's huge. What a difference. And who knows what he's able to do day to day if he's got enough, his definition of enough. He has safe space. He has food to eat. Who knows what good he will do out in the world. So in that ripple sense, you've done something that's potentially, has so much chance of making a difference for him and all the people he touches. So
yeah, and I think it's important. What I'm learning is that I don't have to take on a big project to house every homeless person in Boulder Creek. I mean, that's just not my mission. But I met this other one. His name is Steve, and we I walk my dogs around Boulder Creek, and there's a particular place he had his van, and I just started talking to him, and we got to know each other, and we became friends, So there's people like that need friendship. They need support. They need stuff. And I've taken to him appointments for the Social Security Administration, and I'm taking him to get his Xfinity, his internet set up on Friday, because that's tomorrow. And it's really nice to just be able to help one person, not some abstract thing, Here's a check for God knows where. I'm just helping somebody. Anyway, so it's been a good thing for me.
Yeah, it's great. And it fills us up, right? When we can help a human.
Yeah.
I mean, when the research, before I understood that there was value other than like it felt good to me, like it seemed like the right thing to do and it felt good to me. The research is pretty profound about how much the helper is helped in that process. Just we're flooded with good chemicals, good brain chemicals, because we're built to help. We're pack animals too. So
I'd like that as a headline: humans built to help.
All right, you got it. It's yours. I realize that I've had a shadow here. I have behind me is this big poster.
Oh, there it is.
That's great. It's a big poster.
What's the subhead on the book? Pedaling
through midlife on a bicycle built for two.
Fantastic.
And so I realized we've had that like the shadow of it sitting there through our interview, but I wasn't paying attention to that. Jay and I met in later life. We met in midlife after, wreckages of many 50, 49 and 51.
Yeah. Wow.
And have been together now 25 years. So we assume this one's going to take because our previous ones didn't.
Right.
And so on the wreckage of all those relationships, we built this really robust team. And when I was 60, I guess this is a little vision. This is a sort of va une autre. So Jay had started riding a bicycle again in his late 50s. And I hadn't been on a bike since I was, I think 17. And I thought maybe we should get a tandem bike because I didn't want to do all the paying attention to every detail and, all that stuff.
Right.
So we got an experimental tandem, and for my 60th birthday, I'm 74 now, and we've been riding since. It's been quite a thing. And, when you do anything, metaphors come in your head. And for me, those come easily and quickly. So we'd be on the bike just casually, and I'd be like, oh, climbing this hill, this is like a metaphor for a relationship. It's like sometimes it's just like grind, but you're going to hang in together. Or sometimes there'd be a patch of like sand or something. And this is like a relationship, Jay. This is like you're going along all smoothly, and then boom, unexpectedly, something happens, a facial expression, a word, and you're like in the sand together. So at some point, enough of this collection of metaphors, I was like, oh, we should write a book, which really meant to me that Jay should write the book and I will edit it like crazy because that's what I like. I don't like to actually craft the book. So that's what we do.
Fantastic.
Anyway, I think we're way over your allocated time, are we?
Well, I think we're about to wrap up. So I just want to thank you for this conversation. It's really been interesting for me. From your the whole thing of meeting David Ben-Gurion at that talk initially was really interesting. It sort of set the tone for your life in a sense. It's sort of like, why not you? Why not you connecting with someone? I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And again, I've tried intermittently to send you like quick notes about, thank you for the work you do and thank you for making the world a better place. And it's nice to be able to say this in person to you, but it really, it touches my heart that you do the things you do, Robert, and through your whole career, granted it was for money, but you made a decision to do it for the regular person who could afford to do a very low cost monthly program with you if they wanted to. I forget if it was like $7 or some,
Oh, we still have that.
$14.
Yeah, $9 a
You
month.
know, yeah. So, I just was always struck by the values you lived by in your work. So, with much appreciation, as people say now, I appreciate you. So thanks. And thanks
Thank
for
you,
having me
Szifra.
on. This was nice.
It was great.